Did you ever stop to ask your DM how to spell the name of a shopkeeper? Right smack in the middle of a narrative. Good storytelling gets interrupted by note-taking all of the time. And this is a conversation we're all familiar with. You probably all know at your table that the note-taker is either really good at what they do and you're totally satisfied with that situation, or they just fall down on the job and over again you try to reference notes in the backstory somewhere and they're just gone, or they were never written down to begin with. So I'm not necessarily proclaiming to have the solution to how we can become more immersive storytellers and game players and at the same time write down notes as to what's going on. But it's definitely a conversation that we should be having. And today, Garret and I are going to be discussing this and potentially exploring ways that we can get better at it. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome to iCast Guidance, your Dungeons & Dragons podcast, where every week, Garret and I take a ruler mechanic in the game of D&D that's lackluster or needs improvement, and we offer you advice on how to make your game around that rule more interesting or more fun. So, sharpen up those daggers, we're getting started right now. You know, Garret, when we start getting on the whole Mistborn topic, and we run away with these conversations. So I'm saying this for those of you who are listening, I got to tell you, Garret and I are both reading the Mistborn series right now. And I started this series before Garret did. And Garret has the advantage of both reading and audiobook at work, which I can't do. So you rocketed ahead of me.
I did. You were ahead of me for a long period of time. And, you know, I was the one behind and you're like, I want to tell you about this. And I was feeling it. Now I have finished the first series. And I'm in your seat now where I want to tell you so many things, but don't want to ruin the end.
Oh my God. Yeah, please don't. Because I absolutely hate spoilers. So do me a favor out there, listeners. Don't be commenting on this podcast with anything. I'm currently in The Hero of the Ages. I'm about a third to a half of the way through the book. And I've already ordered The Way of Kings so that I can get right into that afterwards. And I know there's a lot of controversy about the order of things, but, you know, anyway, I love it when we have these runaway conversations. We were supposed to start this recording 20 minutes ago, but we've just been talking Mistborn. Yeah. So we'll bring that into our conversation in another podcast down the road.
There's so much good stuff to talk about.
Oh, my God. How's it going?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing really great this week. I feel like I got a lot done. I'm back to printing minis again for our, we're going to be doing Shadow Dark as a campaign. And so I've been printing terrain. So I'm excited about that. But yeah, things are going well. We decided that we were going to introduce reading a listener comment in each episode of this podcast because we've been getting some good ones.
Yeah.
And I actually really appreciate some of those. So I'll start off with that just so we can address it.
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to bring up some things to address. So we had a listener comment on last week's episode involving initiative, that we were talking about how initiative functions. Right. And the commenter said, this is an interesting topic that I've never really thought about, but heard a lot about. So I'm wondering if rolling initiative at the end of every short or long rest or at the start of every day would be viable. I would say at the start of every session, but if you're playing a combat heavy session and you're playing for a few hours, I feel like that might ruin somebody's session that had a crap roll. And I get that. Also says, once again, I have something new to try and think about outside the box. Thanks. Okay, number one, thanks for this comment. This is great. Yeah. Two, we explored a number of ways to sort of, you know, we were talking about how initiative sort of breaks the narrative and slows things down. And we came up with some ideas. We had some ideas that have already been, you know, sort of talked about on the internet. And I talked about how as a DM, I will start off a session by rolling 10 initiative rolls. And those 10 initiative rolls get written down in a column on a piece of paper. They could apply to any monster or NPC that there might be a fight with, right? So we get to encounter number 1 in our gameplay session, and at the top of my column is a 14. Well, I look at what monster we're dealing with, I'll add their dexterity modifier or their initiative bonus to that number, and that's where I fall in the stack. Once that combat is over, I cross that off. We go to the next one. So what this does is it gives a little bit of variety. We had postulated this idea of rolling initiative once at the beginning of every session.
Yeah, just to help the flow of the game move along.
Right. So that we can, when we go into combat, we don't have to stop, roll initiative, write the numbers down. But the problem is if you've got a rogue in your group that rolls a 2, well, this is totally out of character for that. And to punish them for an entire session because they rolled one time is problematic. And this listener who made this comment catches this, which I'm happy about. So what did we come up with? I like what this commenter says. Yeah,
I like what the commenter says on this. And bringing it into kind of gameplay, I guess it really depends on your sessions. If you're only going to have 1, maybe 2 combats per session, being in the back of the pack, maybe it doesn't feel that great, but it happens. We all have a fumble of a roll here and there.
It's a bad day.
And it's like, man. But then we started talking, if we're going to have a long play session, 5, 6 combats, I like what the commenter says about bringing it into possibly a short rest or a long rest.
Or both.
Yeah, a rest. Reroll your initiative. Have your DM, jot it down and keep playing. Well, and I like that idea.
And what a perfect time in terms of the narrative to place this, because honestly, after you rest, you're probably going to have different reaction times. You're probably going to have different alertness levels. So great. That's the marker.
Yeah, I like that.
So I think in our game, we're going to move that to that location. It's like initiative rolls happen after short rest or long rest, and we keep them.
Yeah, because we talked about this in the podcast, that getting to an encounter that you don't necessarily know about rolling initiative, but you have it recorded as the DM, you look at the person and say, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Don't put that phrase in there, because we talked about it, that it usually brings up, let's just kill everything.
Exactly.
This is the D&D way.
Exactly.
But if we're looking at it a different,
And if I know that initiative roll, right, and I know that my rogue is now at the top of it, and I can turn to that person and say, so how do you react to this? Nod, roll for initiative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. All right. So number one, thanks to that person for dropping the comment. And also for those of you that are listening on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or whatever your podcast mechanism of choice is, leaving a comment can be hard. So you can go over to YouTube and find us at Wither and Bloom Studios. The podcasts are posted there, and you can drop your comments in over on the YouTube channel. And then, we're going to read one of these a week now. And so we would appreciate feedback if you can give it to us, and maybe we'll read your comment on our next show.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. All right. So on today's episode, we're going to be talking about notes and note-taking inside of TTRPGs in general. I mean, we tend to talk Dungeons & Dragons, but, we play a lot of other games. And I think, me as the forever GM, DM, and you as the forever player, because you've announced you'll never do that. You'll never DM.
I'm not sitting on that side of the table. Sorry.
I admire that. I'm like, I just, you know what you like.
Yeah.
That's good. But we're going to be talking about the various elements of notes and note taking, not just from the standpoint of, hey, use this system, but also from the standpoint of where does this work well in a game and where does it not work well? How do we make it better? Hopefully, how do we make it better?
Yeah.
So, I don't know how we want to start this conversation off. I thought I would just kind of mention some of the things I've tried in the past as a DM and where I've ultimately landed and why I like that.
Okay.
And you
start there.
Yeah. You had mentioned that it would be highly likely that as a DM, I'm going to have a much larger and more robust note-taking system simply because I'm doing world building.
Yeah, if you're building your own world, might be a little different if you're running a campaign module.
I agree and kind of mildly disagree, or at least I should say I don't want to take note-taking out of the camp of the player entirely, or I think it could be more robust on the part of the player, but that's a different topic. I'm going to say that, as a DM, I got a lot to write down, a ton. So where have I been in terms of the various mechanisms I use? So yes, I have used pen and paper. When I was 11 years old in, 1980, I had binders filled with drawn maps and player character sheets and, various, like lists of rooms and what was in every room and so on and so forth. So I've been doing that for a long time.
Well, back then you didn't have the digital material that you might have today.
Right, exactly. I mean, in 81, we had no digital material. I had a typewriter.
There you go.
Not really. And I probably used it at some point, to be honest. But I'm dating myself. So let's get up to today, like what I use today. So yeah, I still do use pen and paper for a lot of things. And I'll talk a little later about why I think that's crucial. However, digitally, I've worked my way through several systems.
Yeah.
So it all started with Google Drive and using Google Docs because I like Google Docs because I could have players share backstories with me very easily.
Okay.
Right? They would share their doc about their character's backstory, and it fit in well. I could put it into a file folder and I could get myself organized. Inherently, I'm not a very organized person. I want to be. I always think, tell me if this happens to you out there. You have this grand moment of realization that everything you have is a mess, and you say, I'm going to fix this today. Then you go through and you clean up your desktop, you organize your notes into files and folders, and then you just, I don't know, it slips away. It like oozes out like a hole in a bucket, and all of a sudden, 3 months later, you're back in the same mess you had. This is a problem for DMs, right? And it was for me. And one of the things I think about Google Drive is the most sort of general open framework system. So if you are inherently organized, Google Drive is number one, it's free. And number two, if you're inherently organized, you can make this work for you. You can create file trees, you can link to other documents, right? So if you're organized enough and you're writing your notes, say, okay, let's break it down. You've got a game session and your players are in a city and you're taking some quick notes in your Google Drive as the DM. And you're like, all right, the players are in the city of North Veritas and they're in the Toenail Tavern, right? Okay. So you can have those notes. Then you can highlight each of those things. You can highlight North Veritas. You can highlight the Toenail, and you can link to the documents in your file tree that refer to those entities. Okay. You could have a whole document on North Veritas, which you should.
Yeah.
Great. So you can create a very organized note-taking system in and amongst that. Cool. But the problem is you have to have that kind of initiative, pardon the pun, and drive to be able to go and do that.
I was going to say, that seems, just coming from my visual, that seems like a lot of work.
I know people that embrace that and love it. And I think it works really well for them. All right. So then what are the alternatives? So we move on to systems that were developed for world builders. And now, to be clear, I'm not going to bash any particular system, not hard. I will talk about where I think things fall down a little bit. Okay. And so if you go online and you Google, like world building note-taking systems, you're going to get bombarded with links to World Anvil. And I used World Anvil. I subscribed to World Anvil for a very long time. And it's the type of interface. You know what World Anvil reminds me of? It reminds me a little bit of Roll20.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. You probably know where this is going. I'm not going to dominate this conversation the whole time. I just want to talk about three systems really quickly, and then I'm going to throw it to the player. The reason World Anvil reminds me of Roll20 is they are both really great intentioned Dungeons and Dragons online systems that look like their user interface was designed by somebody who just built the plane while they were flying. And it does, anybody who's played Roll20 knows how absolutely unbearably clunky that system is. Nobody comes to Roll20 saying, oh, I get this. You have to watch scores of videos to understand how to run Roll20. But the thing about Roll20 is once you figure it out, it's a really good system that's got a lot of moving parts at its core that you can shift and adjust. I loved the map making system in that, but it is not a system you can come to and understand intuitively. World Anvil is like this. World Anvil is a system that's really designed for people that want to take the time to understand that interface. And I think that it's really, really, I spent a year with World Anvil and was still confused about how things worked. I don't think a good user interface is going to do that. Okay, so where do I land? What do I use now? I do not use Google Docs and I do not use World Anvil anymore. I'm using Obsidian. Obsidian is insane. It is insane how well it works and how intuitive it is. It is basically the file tree system of Google Docs, but with an inherently built-in linking system like you'd need to be really kind of like, well organized to do in Google Docs. So basically, you're typing away in Obsidian with your notes. And like I mentioned before, this link to North Veritas. Well, you want to talk about North Veritas? Fine. 2 brackets before you type the word North Veritas, and it says, we're linking to this, and boom, it creates the inherent link. It creates the North Veritas document if you don't have it already. And then boom, you're taking notes. You can get so organized. It's got a visual connected tree. Much like, remember tag clouds?
No.
Tag clouds were a thing that existed for a while, that a word was mentioned in a document, you could go look and see, and the words would be larger if they were mentioned more. And in Obsidian, you've got all these linked dots that exist in a matrix. So the more things that link to a document, the more you have. So anyway, as a DM, I'm using Obsidian. I really want to get into this in more detail, but I want to talk about the player. Let's talk about how you as player do this.
So coming from my side, because I'm inherently always the player here, I have found a lot of the times that note taking, this is me personally, I can't speak for everyone, it takes me out of the play. It takes me out of the immersion. I get distracted when I'm trying to take notes. So for myself, I find that I take really simplified notes. I'll write down an important NPC's name. I'll write down, the name of that bar, stuff like that. And I just kind of build off of that. And I try and categorize stuff out based on location, NPC names, quests, important loot. And that's mainly all I put in there. But I feel like I miss a lot of stuff because there's important things we're talking about in game, but then because I don't write it down, it's just lost to my memory.
Yeah.
But I feel like when I'm trying to write down every little thing, I lose the game and, I lose what you're saying. So we got to look at it that's just coming from me. I know some people can just, jam out on a laptop, write down notes infinitely of what, is being said, and they don't get distracted at all on that. I want to take much better notes. And you made a comment that this is something to definitely try. And I think I've heard of this before. Recording your sessions.
Audio recording.
Yes, audio recordings. And maybe instead of trying to write it down, and this will take a little work because you're going to have to circle back on it, but audio record your sessions and have a little notepad and just write down the important times.
Yeah.
So if there's, an important NPC that's mentioned, write down a little, bullet point, hour and 15 minutes. And you go back to that audio recording and you get that information.
You could even tag that timestamp with like NPC note, and then say an hour and 15.
So instead of writing down the person's, name, and you might have to circle back with your DM on how to spell it or et cetera, but just instead of trying to write it all down, get that spelling in the gameplay, interrupting your DM, how do you spell that? Because that takes away from the game. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that.
I feel exactly the same way. Immersion wise, there's a couple of DMs that I see on YouTube Shorts and TikTok and, Instagram Reels. A couple of them are really quite good. And one of them the other day, I can't remember his name. He's pointing out, he's like, how many DMs do this? You start a session, you create a page for your notes in whatever note-taking system you use. And it's like session 28, February 5th. You write down one line of information. 3 hours goes by and you have nothing else on that note sheet. And that's me 80% of the time. That's how I roll. Now we're fortunate enough to have the gear to record our show.
Yeah.
And we can go back and look at it. But I love the idea of an audio recording because, all right, look, if you're playing for 4 hours, it's hard to spend 4 hours going through your audio recording to get the things you need. So you do need that supplemental list next to you. That says,
if you take the time to put the list down.
Right.
You can go back and, quick get to that point.
I think a lot of the stuff that we bring up has to do with interruption of flow.
Yeah.
Initiative was like that. This is definitely like that. Like, I don't want to stop to write things down all the time because I just want to keep that ball rolling. You know, improv, and look, there's a lot, I hate the word improv when it comes to playing Dungeons and Dragons because this is not an improv session. But to some degree, I will be surprised as a DM at things that come out of my mouth and how much they enhance the game. There is something inherent in all the time I've spent building my framework of a world. There is something inherent in my responses to you as players that comes out as if it's improv. And if I'm stopping to write notes down all the time, that's not allowed to flow.
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to take away. I enjoy sitting down at this table and getting into the story, getting into the play. And I would say it's a little ignorant to not take notes at all. Because, you know, you're then 100% relying on the DM to a couple sessions down the road. You're like, oh, who's that person we met? If the player doesn't take any initiative at all, I think that's a little wrong. You got to have something.
Yes.
Or at least someone in your group should have something.
Yeah, I agree. And can I just jump in as DM and just say, okay, number one, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Because as a DM, it drives me absolutely off the rails when my players come to the table and they know nothing about what has happened. And I've had that happen in the past. And that says to me 100%, I've put hours of work into this for your enjoyment and mine. And when you come back and you don't know anything, it says to me, you don't care.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to play with people that don't care.
Yeah.
You know, if you're constantly distracted in my game because you're off on your phone, I don't want to play with you.
Yeah.
So, you know, show your DM that you are invested. And look, this might be hard. Maybe your DM's not doing a great job of telling a story and you're not invested.
Yeah.
That's maybe it's time to get a new game. But if you are, as a player, a good note taker and you come to the table knowing the story, I think you're making an investment in your game that both bolsters your DM's commitment to the game, and it also has a lot of opportunity for you to enhance backstory, to enhance the detail of how your character lives in that world. These are all really fantastic things.
Yeah. No, I agree on that. And I mean, on the aspect of backstory, keeping the notes, and I feel like for myself, because I don't remember it 100% of the time, but I need to have that written down so that I can access that. And I got to find a way to access it quickly, because there's been a time where it's like, what's that person's name?
Right.
And if I don't remember it, I need to be able to. So being organized in your note taking, you know, maybe having different categories or different, you know, sections, and you bringing up the online tool, maybe that can help the player having separate categories of names and locations and stuff like that broken down,
right,
to easily access,
right.
You know,
this is a topic for another podcast, but I'm just going to throw this in there. I feel like there are two columns of TTRPG players. There are the TTRPG players that have completely forgotten what the TT means. Tabletop's stripped. You're on Roll20, you're on Discord, you're talking through microphones, and you're using all things digital. There is no physical connectivity. Now, does that game work for thousands of tables? Yep. And it gives people an opportunity to play. And I'm very thankful for it, especially during the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
We relied on it. Is that my style of play? Absolutely not. I will not engage. As a matter of fact, if my players can't make it to this room to play this game, we don't patch you in through Discord. We don't do it. Why? Well, because I believe in the tactile experience. I believe in the physicality of the game. And that's going to lead me into this point I'm going to make about note taking, which I think first of all, I use digital tools to take my notes. Okay. So I'd be contradicting myself if I said I was against that. I'm not. However, can I get weird?
I mean, you always, here's the Todd gets weird.
Here's Todd's tangent. Here's Todd's tangent on this, because I think this is really important. All right. There was a study done, and I'm going to botch this one because my research is a little bit foggy on the dates, but during the time that laptops were coming into prevalence as the tool of choice for writers, there was a period of time when writer's block as a sort of noted issue starts to spike. And there was a study done to see if somehow the laptop had something to do with the spike in writer's block amongst people that were creatives in the field of writing. So in this study, we had a group of people that were given laptops, and we had a group of people that were given legal pads. And they were told to sort of go and stream of consciousness, sort of begin creating.
Okay.
They found over and over again in this study that the people who were given legal pads spiked in their creativity. So why? Why did this happen? There's a neuroscientist named Frank Wilson who wrote a book called The Hand. And if you're out there listening to this and you're one of my former students, or you've ever heard me talk in an academic setting about creativity, you've heard me beat this drum. And that's this. Frank Wilson's study looks at the hand as the impetus for brain development. What this means is that when you activate your hand by making something, by writing something, the idea centers in your brain not only they light up, but they also develop. They're activated, right? We often think that as creators, we start in a void and we say, what is my idea? What do I want to make? And the problem with that is it starts in the brain and comes out through the hand. What Frank Wilson postulates is that if the hand is activated, so let's say we're talking to a friend on the phone, or we're watching a YouTube video and we're doodling, we're not thinking about what we're drawing. Our hand is just moving. You're going to make a mark on that page, or you're going to, you're going to feel pencil against paper, and it's going to light up that idea center in the brain, and all of a sudden the ideas come. So I suggest that it is better to, number one, write your notes by hand, because the physical act of writing is going to give you ideas. And this is scientifically proven. This is not just my weirdness happening right now. That's number one. But number two, when you cannot think of an idea, you're a player trying to think of a backstory, start writing. Start writing. Write what you had for breakfast this morning. Write what you did yesterday afternoon. And as your hand hits that paper and moves, you're going to be creating in your head. Your mind lights up. So I'm a big proponent of pen on paper. Now, I have to say, one thing I look back on with you when we used to play was we call you our rules lawyer in our game. And it's more than just about your knowledge of the game. It has to do with the meticulousness through which you run your whole game style. You come to the table, you have a particular way your dice tray lays on the table, you organize your dice in a particular way, you've got just the right angle your iPad sits at the table for access to your character sheet. And on top of that, you used to have that killer notebook, which I loved. Tell me about that.
So a while back, I found this notebook at a PAX event. It was a PAX Unplugged event. It was from the Rook and the Raven. What I loved about this notebook, it was their player journal. My favorite thing about this notebook was it was a disc-bound notebook. So if you don't know what that is, it's like 8 round discs off to the, as you're binding. But what was cool about it is the pages had notches in them. You could take the page out of the notebook, lay it down, so your binding's not in your way. Nothing's in your way as you're writing your notebook or in your notes.
Yeah. So if that's hard to visualize, it's a picture a 3-ring binder that you don't have to unclip the rings.
Yeah. So that's a perfect example. You gently peel the page off, you can write on it, and then put it back in your notebook in whatever order you want. So at the beginning of the session, I would have the quest page, because they were all broken out in categories. And this is what I also loved about them. There was organization to them. There was NPCs, there was locations, there was quests, and there was notes. So I would take out the last session of notes, and I would take that out. I would take out the quest page maybe. And if I was in a certain location, maybe I'd pull out an NPC page. And I would keep the notebook there, but it wasn't, I'm not flipping through pages. I have the most relevant info right there in front of me. And then nothing's in my way as I'm taking notes. And then at the end of the session, I just put them back into the notebook. And I loved it. And they don't sell that stuff anymore. Their company moved over, they moved to Italy. They rebranded their company a little bit, and I can't get those pages for that notebook. And I have tried so many different notebooks that just haven't hit the spot the same way that one did.
Yeah. And two things I want to say about this. So one, when I hear you talk about a small detail in a book like that, where it's like it was just about the disc binding and the way you could take a page out and put it back in. And you went into more detail on why this was important to you when we were talking on the side. And it to me, that is a testament to your attention to detail, that something like that matters. It's not just about, I picked up the 89-cent notepad at the drugstore and this is all I use and it lays in my bag like a rag. It really has to have a certain level of presence to it.
Yes. And that's what I liked about that notebook. It wasn't cheap, but in all my aspects of this game, like you were saying, I put love into the stuff that I bring to this table. I have a nice tray. I have really nice dice. I have a really nice notebook. And it's just how I like to play this game.
Right. But it's really about, there's also something about, it's not just about the fact that they're not, like we all know what's nice, do I want a wormwood gaming table in my house? Yeah. Could I make that table? Yeah. Could I make it as well as them? I'm not going to lie. Yeah. Do I have the time, energy, resources right now to make that table? No, I don't. But I appreciate nice, right? And so it's about more than that with you. There's something about ergonomics. There's something about the kind of the touch of the paper. You mentioned the weight of the paper in that book.
Yeah, it was, because you have the ability to peel that page out of the disc binding, it was a nice quality, heavy weighted page of a piece of paper.
Yeah.
So that it didn't just tear away. It's not like you said, the 89-cent, piece of junk notebook paper. It had a nice weight to it. It was quality. And I connected to it. And I have yet to find that in another notebook. I've tried a couple different ones. I've tried, just your standard ring-bound notebook. And I just don't get the same connection to it. Maybe because it's not, fancy and bordered and, categorized and stuff like that. But, I found a connection to that notebook.
And I really, really admire and appreciate that. Now, one of the things I think you and I have that, we can't bring this all into a podcast, right? But Garret and I, as creative practitioners, as design thinkers, and as frankly, really immersed gamers, we love to invent or think about how to make this thing better, right? And so right now, Garret and I are actively working on a design for a note-taking set, which I'm excited about. And it borrows from a lot of these languages we've seen, but it also capitalizes on our needs. And this is what good design is, enhancing or I should say solving an existing problem. And I've noticed that there's a problem with this out there in the TTRPG world. Nobody has really answered this really, really well. And maybe our design won't be for everybody, but we're working on that right now. So look for that this fall. We're going to drop our next thing this fall. Hopefully in November, we're going to get there. But we've used a lot of these systems, and each one leaves us feeling a little bit lacking.
Yeah.
You know what? This is a good time to take a break.
Okay.
All right. Let's take a break. And we're going to have either some advertising agency say a whole bunch of words to you, or you'll hear me say words to you. I don't know what it'll be, but we'll be right back. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to reach out for a minute and tell you how much we love what we do. First of all, Wither and Bloom Studios loves making Dungeons and Dragons content. And all of us here, and there's quite a few of us, we all have different angles that we want to take this from. This means that we can provide for you a really diverse channel with lots of different content. And you probably know that already, but I just wanted to throw that out there to you. Now, Garret and I on iCast Guidance work really hard at developing these conversations and possibly even collaborating with others. And we're looking to you for a little bit of support. Now, we have set up a Patreon at patreon.com/Wither and Bloom Studios. If you head over there, you can check out what we've got available. And for the simple price of like a cup of coffee per month, you can help us continue to make this material happen. We offer a whole bunch of great perks, so we're excited to get those to you. Those things include like monthly newsletters, downloadable PDF homebrew content that you can play in your game, Discord roles,
shout outs, all kinds of stuff. So we're asking if you would come along for the ride. Also, when it comes to monetization on these channels and these types of things, it's hard. It's really hard to do. Oftentimes you think, well, if you just hit it in terms of views, you're just going to go buy a yacht. Well, number one, we could give a shit about a yacht. We don't really want that. But number two, it's the type of thing that when other advertisers get into your space, they oftentimes can tell you what they want. And we don't want that. We'd rather be supported by you guys, the D&D community. We don't want a bunch of corporate people, kind of making decisions about what we make our content about. So help us out. And the more you do, the more we're going to be able to bring you. And I'm looking forward to actually making a whole bunch more of this downloadable content for you guys. So go over to patreon.com/Wither and Bloom Studios and grab yourself a membership. And then jump into the Discord and say hi and tell us what's going on and tell us what you want to see. We can't wait to sort of get aligned with you guys a little bit better and hearing about what you want us to make. So let's get back to this topic for today, and we will be talking to you soon. Thank you.
All right. So before the break came, we were talking about a whole bunch of different methodologies. We were talking about, different types of notebooks and digital systems. Mm-hmm. But let's give our listeners a potential solution for this at the table, because I think this is like, this is the key of our podcast. But also, you and I have had some discussions about ways to make this a lot better, right?
Yeah.
So oftentimes at your tables, and correct me if I'm wrong, but oftentimes at your tables, you will have a person who functions as the note taker, right? I mean, we've always assigned that, or someone's volunteered it. Currently in our game, we have a note taker who is, exhaustively detailed. Like he has that keyboard is clacking away the whole time.
Click, 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 just constantly.
You go over to YouTube and listen to one of our sessions, you can gently hear the tapping of the keys in the background. But where's the problem with that, Garret?
So what I have found and what I've noticed is if he's looking for a note, because he takes down very detailed notes about everything that's going on, everything that's happening, almost everything that's being said. But then when we need to reference back to it, because it's not broken down, you're flipping through or you're scrolling through the laptop looking for this note. And it's like you're now losing track of the game because you don't have the organization to it.
Exactly.
So on the key point of taking down everything, I think you really got to circle back a bit post session and kind of break it down into categories, or different, bullet points or something like that, so you can easily access it.
Right. Or another idea that we could probably propose here that I think would work is, number one, if we go back to the thing I said about writing as a force of creativity, I think every player at the table should be the note taker. And then if you were to give each player a particular area of the notes that was their responsibility. So for example, let's say you have your highly charismatic bard at the table. Put them in charge of taking notes about the NPCs. Yeah. They're going to be doing a lot of the conversation anyway, right? If you have somebody who's your loot hoarder or somebody who's the table accountant, put them in charge of taking notes about what you've gathered, what everybody should have.
We've done that in the past.
We have. Now this does a couple of things, right? Number one, it breaks the tasks up into things that are much more sort of attainable. Granted, I know the pushback here. The pushback here is going to be, but not everybody at my table is a note taker. So if we give someone the job of doing notes about NPCs and they suck at note taking, we're never going to remember an NPC.
Yeah, so there's a flaw in that.
There is, but my thing is this, is if you're writing with your hand, pen on paper for a session, you're not only taking notes for the table so that you keep track of the history of the game, but you are potentially opening up avenues of detail for your character backstory. Because let's say it's during the week, your game's not on right now, right? But you hop on Discord and you DM your DM and you say, hey, got to thinking a lot about what happened in the last session with an artifact that we found. Can there be a connection to that artifact and my character's family's backstory? Can we bring, because now you can help the DM weave the story, right?
Yeah.
And it's because you were more engaged in tracking the story.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think getting into that, realm of note taking and maybe even circling back on it post session, like you said. I saw some recommendations on that. Is if you're not an amazing note taker during gameplay, maybe write down just bullet points or important things, but then after you're done with your session, you go home, take 20 minutes to organize that a little bit, put down a little better, information or the following day or something like that. And like you said, maybe that brings into your mind a little more, just circling back to it post game.
Yeah. All right. So, we've got some suggestions here on how you can make note taking a little bit better, or at least how to think about note taking in a new light at your table. And I like the suggestion of getting all the players to try and engage in that. But listen, hop on over to our YouTube channel, find this podcast on there, and tell us what you do. Give us some feedback on that. I know we've got a few listeners that are going to do that anyway, and I'm actually looking forward to hearing from them about how they deal with note taking at their table.
I would love to hear from some of our listeners.
Yeah.
Get over there and comment.
And we'll potentially read one of those or more than one of those on the next episode, just to kind of keep it going. So
I agree.
Cool. All right. Listen, everybody, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate having you along for the ride, and we will see you next week. Gareth, thanks for the chat.
Yeah, it was good.
All right. We'll talk to you all soon. Take care. All right, everybody. iCast Guidance is produced by Todd Lambrix and Garrett Brennan. Head on over to our YouTube channel at Wither and Bloom Studios, where you can check out all of the other content that we create there on a regular basis. As well as this podcast being posted there, you can comment on these podcasts there, where we will potentially read your comments on the air. And if you feel like supporting this endeavor and all that we bring you, please go over to patreon.com/Wither and Bloom Studios, where you can see our Patreon page and what we offer for your support, and know that you have our eternal thanks and gratitude if you should choose to support us. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.